Okay, so what we want to do today is create a ground plane and also create a fence, just a simple fence. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but I'm going to first create a ground plane. So I'm going to go to Create Polygon Primitives Plane, and I'm going to go to Options. And I think it's going to be bigger than 20 by 20, but I'm going to make my divisions 80 by 80. So we have enough geometry there, enough mesh to sculpt later. I might even increase it a little bit later, but for now it's good. I'm bringing it all the way up to the beginning of my sidewalk. I'm going to hide my original plane, and now I'm going to create a fence. So before I do that, I'm going to actually create the material that I'm going to apply to the fence. So I'm going to do a fence as a Lambert material because I'm giving everybody, and it's up to you, you can create a fence out of whatever you want. Here's a picket fence color map and a picket fence transparency map. So we're going to use that transparency to make it look like we have a picket fence that has holes through them. So let's go to our Hypershade, create materials, Lambert. I want a Lambert because we don't want any specularity. I'm going to name this one fence because eventually we're going to have several materials in there. We want to be able to identify them quickly. Go to Color, File, and then I've got to go Dig again to my 3D house, Textures, and down at the bottom we have Picket Fence Color. The ping file looks like that. I'm going to open that. And then I'm going to click back on my fence and map the transparency map to the transparency property. So I'm going to File, same path, 3D house, textures, transparency ping looks like that. Remember, transparency works in black and white. You can see my little fence here has some transparency. Now, word of warning, when we apply this to the fence, we're probably not going to see that transparency. So, just a heads up. So now I'm going to minimize that. And I'm going to create another plane. Create Polygon Primitives Plane Options. And I want to change my settings back. Oh, let's start with a width of 20 and a height of 5, and I'm just going to go 1-to-1 here. We can adjust accordingly if we need to, and I'm going to move that out front, and we want to rotate it up. Now, picket fences typically are not very tall. I'm going to rotate this perfectly 90 degrees. Now we're just going to start sort of moving it in place. I can go to my different cameras to help out with that. I'm going to move it up. That's a pretty tall fence, so I'm going to scale it down somewhere around there. Move it down so it's embedded into my sidewalk, and I'm going to move it over. Now again, I'm going to go to perspective because I want my fence to start at about the edge of where I have my walkway, somewhere around there, and I want the end to go to the end of my sidewalk. So what I'm really going to do here is I'm going to select by vertex and our vertices, and I'm going to go to the front view and I'm going to move those out to the edge of my sidewalk. Now when we do that, it changes our center, our pivot. Okay, so I like to center my pivot. You'll see it jump a little bit left. So we have it right in the middle of our fence. All right, that looks pretty good. We want to make sure it's penetrating through the ground, so I'm just going to move it down a little bit. And now we're going to project to the face. So get my planar projection options. We have to go in the z-axis, and immediately I'm going to go in and I'm going to assign the material to selection. And you can sort of see it there. Keep in mind that my projection, I uncheck keep image width and height ratio for that one. Because now when I look at my UV editor here, I hit F, it is now a square, which means, guess what, we're going to have to scale it left and right to approximately the size of the actual fence. But I do like it, the height to be the 1-to-1 because we want the top of it to be correct. Now if I zoom way in, you can sort of see the texture a little bit. We can tell if each one is a little bit too skinny. Maybe I squashed it too much. So I'm going to grab my UVs. We're going to move them out of the middle of our UV editor. And I'm going to scale them. I'm moving pretty far. Let's go here. I'm going to scale them down a little bit so the fence is a little bit wider. And then I really have to pay attention to the edges. So Because I know this edge of my fence, I'm going to turn the corner. I want these UVs to go to half, cut this board in half. So I'm going to select those UVs and move them over. And I'm going to zoom way in here to the very top and middle mouse click so it's at the peak of my image. Then I want the one over here to not have this side rail. I want it to go to the edge of one of the boards. So again, zoom out, go over to the right side, make sure you're selecting by UVs, and I'm going to move this back. And again, zoom way in there. I want it to go right up the edge of that, because that fence is going to start with a board and it's going to end with half a board. Now, the tricky part. I want another fence to start here and go backwards. So I'm going to duplicate this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my pivot to the corner vert. It can be either the top or bottom one, because then when we rotate 90 degrees, it's going to be a perfect 90 degrees from there. So to free up our gizmo here, our manipulator, I hit insert, and then I hold down V, and I'm going to pop it up, orbit around a little bit to there, and then I hit insert again to lock that in. And now if I rotate it, it's like a fence. It's like a gate, something like that. I'm going to go to my channel box and make sure rotate Y is 90. Now we have a fence going front and back. So you can use this technique to move your fences around. Now the middle of this fence, we have the border edge of that plank there. So even if I duplicate this, I want more fencing over here, and I move it over, I want to make sure that my UVs are corrected a little bit. Alright, so you have to sort of do this one at a time. I am going to snap to X, or excuse me, snap the whole thing to the vert there so that my two panels are perfectly lined up. So I held down V and snapped to the corner vert. Now again, I got to play with the UVs a little bit to make this look right. So I get my UV editor, I hit F, and I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to select by face and click on that face. And I'm going to move this one straight down a couple, my UV editor. And again, I got to make sure that that right edge, not the right edge, this right edge, I can see the UVs here, is over a little bit so that we don't see any of the planks. So that looks pretty good right there, but I don't want it there. I'm going to zoom in here so I can move this more subtly. Somewhere around there. Then I'm going to check the other end of the fence, and it looks pretty good. We can start another one there if we want. You can create another plane, reproject. You really just want to make sure that you have your fence pieces lined up properly. Now again, we can't see the transparency here. I can assume it's there because I mapped that map to the transparency, but what I'm going to have to do is do a test render. So we want to create a light, or a couple lights really quick. Light, spotlight, hit T. Remember, we can move that out. I'm going to go to my attribute editor and bump up the cone angle to make sure I can see the front face of my fence. And then I'm going to duplicate it, move it over here to the side, bump that cone angle up just a little bit more. And then I'm going to zoom in here with my camera so that when I do a render, window, rendering editors, render settings, and we make sure we're in Maya software up here, and I'm going to use an intermediate quality. So now when I hit my test render button, boom, you can see that we have transparency with our renders. So that's it for creating a fence. Obviously, I would do a little more work, get that fence to totally surround my yard. Again, making sure that the boards are lined up properly and you don't have any little messes anywhere. And that's all she wrote for this segment.